The warm Aegean sun hangs overhead. As a shepherd, you stand near the shoreline in a field as your sheep lazily chew the grass. The sun reaches its height for the day, and the heat coaxes sweat from your brow. Leaning on your hook, you gaze across the blue waters, feeling the stiff sea breeze cool your face. Suddenly, you see two figures. You think they might be huge birds, but even at their height, they are much too large. Then you realize they look like people with wings. You fall to one knee. Surely no mortal can fly. These must be gods returning to Olympus. But as you continue to watch, one of them suddenly begins to climb, soaring higher. You shield your eyes as the figure is silhouetted against the summer sun. As you squint and watch, the hapless flyer seems to pause in midair before starting to fall, turning over and then spiraling down. Even at this distance, tiny feathers seem to scatter into the air. The figure falls, futilely pumping his now bare arms until he hits the sea in a white splash. The second figure circles where the first fell, and the breeze carries a heartbroken voice to your ears, saying, "Ho, Icarus, where are you? Where shall I seek my boy?" After another moment circling, the solitary figure returns to its original heading and flies out of sight. In the weeks that follow, you tell the story to everyone who will listen, what you saw that fateful afternoon. Then one day you run into another eyewitness. To your surprise, a fisherman describes seeing the same two figures from another stretch of coastline. Later still, a farmer tells an almost identical story from his fields inland. As you return to the fields to tend your sheep, you imagine what it must be like to take upon you massive wings and master the sky. We've all heard the story of Icarus, who donned wings of wax and feathers and flew too close to the sun, falling into the sea. It has been interpreted for 2,000 years as a fable, a story meant to teach us that hubris and pride can lead to our destruction. But what if the flight of Icarus wasn't just a legend? What if that flight actually happened? Welcome to Paranormal Possibilities, where we talk about what is possible, what is probable, and what is unlikely. Today we're talking about the famous figure Icarus and his father Daedalus. Daedalus was a renowned inventor in Greek mythology who was hired by King Minos of Crete to design many things for him, including the labyrinth, which was the home of the Minotaur. However, Daedalus ran afoul of the king and was imprisoned in a tower with his son Icarus. Reasoning that the king controlled the land and the sea, the only means of escape would be to fly. According to the legend, he laid down lines of feathers, beginning with the smallest, following the shorter and longer ones, so that you might think they had grown like that on a slant. In that way, long ago, the rustic panpipes were graduated with lengthening reeds. Then he fastened them together with thread in the middle and beeswax at the base, and when he had arranged them, he flexed each one in a gentle curve, so that they imitated real birds' wings. Then Daedalus warned his son Icarus to follow his flight path. Too low, and the sea would soak the feathers. Too high, and he'd be burned by the sun. After an emotional goodbye, Daedalus takes flight from the tower out over the sea. Icarus follows obediently. Stretching out ahead of them, the Aegean islands line up as if they're looking at a map. Icarus, overjoyed by this exhilarating experience, ignores his father's counsel and begins to climb higher and higher. According to the story, the wax holding the wings together began to melt under the heat of the sun, and as they disintegrate, he plunges to his death, drowned in the sea. His father cries for him, searching until he finds feathers floating on the top of the water. Knowing his son is lost to him, Daedalus retrieves his son's body and buries it on the island that now bears the name Icaria. Then reluctantly, he continues on with his escape. We know about these two through the Roman poet Ovid, who lived from 43 BC to AD 17. Ovid was one of the premier writers of his time and spent considerable effort cataloging old legends and folklore from the ancient world. The story of Icarus and Daedalus was almost certainly hundreds of years old by the time Ovid heard it, having survived as a Greek tale long before Ovid's birth. Wanting to preserve as many such tales as possible, Ovid recorded the story, which survives to this day. The reason I bring up Ovid as a storyteller of an older story is to illustrate that his version of the story is written through the mind of an accomplished writer, someone who knows his way around a story. We can safely deduce that he kept most of the key details intact, but no doubt added his own impressions and moral lessons to the story himself. Blaming the fall of Icarus on the boy's hubris, for example, might be an invention of Ovid's, rather than part of the tale as told by the Greeks. Let's consider for a moment the clues that there may be more to this story than meets the eye. We have an inventor who is so accomplished and famous that King Minos sends for him, asking him to design many things. Daedalus in the story has no trouble building the wings. In fact, he already seems to understand the perils of using them before their flight, since he warns Icarus to take the middle way between the sky and the sea. Perhaps Daedalus had already invented a way to fly, not a contraption or machine that realizes powered flight. It would be highly unlikely that anyone using the tools and materials of ancient Greece could pull that off. But it doesn't need to fly, it just needs to glide. And a glider is a lot less of a challenge than a flying machine. Maybe Daedalus, in his effort to design a way to fly, noticed the shape of a bird's wings, how the top surface curves up and over while the bottom is flatter. This creates lift. If he realized and tested this, a glider would be possible, hypothetically speaking. Then he's imprisoned in a tower. This wouldn't be a tower by modern standards, but could very realistically be 2 or 3 stories high, with a patio or area where they could launch their gliders. If the tower were on the coast, the wind from the sea could create ample lift. Picture paragliders grabbing their first thermal and climbing into the heavens. It is unlikely the wings were built from feathers, wax, and twine, as the story says. Whether this comes from a legend or not is less important, because no one but Daedalus would know how the contraption was built. A shepherd who has only ever seen birds and bugs fly could scarcely imagine how an inventor would fabricate wings. Let's assume for a moment that Daedalus had a more sophisticated blueprint from which to work, as it were. Let's assume this glider could bear his weight, but not his and his son's, hence having to build 2 and coach his son how to fly the second one. And let's assume it was more than just feathers, wax, and twine. If so, you may ask, what about the wax melting in the sun? Great question. More on that in a second. Ovid mentions 3 eyewitnesses to the flight, a shepherd, a fisherman, and a plowman. This is interesting because this is the kind of detail that would survive through oral retelling and is a part of the story that often gets overlooked. From their perspective, they think they see gods at first. They realize they are men when Icarus falls into the sea. They don't know how or why Icarus's wings come apart. They know they did because they saw it happen. 3 eyewitnesses from 3 different locations and perspectives. They are standing where they are, at ground or sea level, looking up at the sky. Icarus, from their perspective, seems to be right next to the sun, close enough to touch it. They don't realize, having never been in the air, that the sun is very much higher up than that. To them, he's close enough that the sun's heat must be a serious problem. They see the wings come apart, they see debris falling down with them, and maybe they assume those are feathers. After all, what else could a wing be made from, if not feathers? If the wax didn't melt, if there was wax at all, what happened to Icarus? If he flew too high, it is possible the atmosphere started to get to him. At 20,000 feet, it gets hard to breathe. Oxygen deprivation and hypoxia can set in. He might have gotten so cold he couldn't move or adjust his glider enough. If I had to guess, I'd say the story itself gives us the reason for his demise. He wanted to fly higher, so he pitched his glider up, up, up. Remember, he doesn't know anything about lift or drag. He only knows what his father has told him. As he pitches upward, the angle of attack on the wings begins to collapse the amount of lift. Suddenly, he's in a stall. This happens to modern aircraft as well. If you've ever been to an air show, you've probably seen a hammerhead stall, where the pilot climbs, slows, stops, begins to fall backwards, then uses the rudder to flip the aircraft around so the wings can regain their lift, and dives back into flight. Icarus would not have known any of this. He just wanted to fly higher. Once he stalled, he might have panicked. As he fell head over heels out of control, he might have thrashed at whatever passed for controllers on his glider, and as he began to spiral out of control, the lightweight and fragile contraption simply broke apart, and he fell hundreds or thousands of feet to his death. It is easy to dismiss old folklore and written stories as fantasy and fiction. Did India really have vimanas, flying temples, and soaring chariots? Did a Japanese fisherman really discover a red-haired woman inside a strange enclosed vessel floating in the ocean? And did Icarus, the beloved son of the inventor Daedalus, really soar from the top of the tower, only to falter over the sea and island that now bears his name? The important part isn't that we believe Icarus really flew, it is that we always remain willing to dig deeper, to read between the lines of the stories as they are told, to consider the possible, the probable, and the unlikely. Now it's your turn. Tell me in the comments, do you think it is plausible there really was an inventor in ancient Greece that figured out the modern arrow wing and created gliders, only to lose his son in a crash? Or is it simply a story about the dangers of pure hubris? If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. For channels with millions of subscribers, they may not notice you, but I notice and appreciate everyone who subscribes, and will do my best to continue to keep looking at the paranormal stories between the stories that others might overlook. Until next time, remember, the possibilities are endless.